Hey, welcome back to Road Tripping with Rachel. I'm Rachel. Thank you so much for joining me on this road trip because we're in the middle of Vlogmas. So Vlogmas is getting off to a good start. This is the second video for our mini series about the family Christmas tree of Christ. Last time we were together, we talked about Adam. Today we're going to be talking about Abraham. And I really enjoy Abraham. If you've been following me for a while, you know I went through the book of Genesis. The very first year I was actually on YouTube. And really took some time to go through like all the patriarchs. But as we have been going through, I thought it was very appropriate that if we're going to talk about the family Christmas tree of Christ, then we really needed to talk about Abraham. So similar to Adam, you have, the initial, person that is the father of all mankind, but then you have Abraham, and Abraham is the father of the Hebrew nation. He appears in the book of Genesis. I believe it is like chapter 12 or 13, somewhere in there, that we first are introduced to Abraham. I believe it's 12. I checked. I've got my notes, so if you see me glancing down, that's what I'm doing. I'm reading my notes. He's the father of the Hebrew nation. We're introduced to him in Genesis chapter 12. He leaves his home, which was Ur of the Chaldees, which eventually became Babylon, and he travels to the land of Canaan with his wife and with his nephew, Lot. Both of those people play very critical roles in the development of the Hebrew people, like as a culture and in their interactions with other peoples in the surrounding area. Abraham is also very important because Abraham's story in and of itself is very much the picture of a very flawed man. Abraham was extremely faithful, but dude screwed up. And when he screwed up, he screwed up really royally. Some of the things that Abraham did that was actually just pure stupidity is that not once, but twice, he lies about his wife being his sister. Because he didn't learn the first time, so he did it a second time. He took one of his wife's maids and had a baby with her, and then instead of keeping the baby, ends up sending the woman and the child off into the wilderness. That child eventually grows up and becomes a thorn in the side of his younger brother for generations to come. In fact, we're still dealing with that. It's just we live with the consequences of a lot of the things that Adam did. We also are still living with a lot of the consequences of the things that Abraham did. And Abraham is also known as one of the patriarchs. So that would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are you could think of them as the big three within the Hebrew people. And that is really their faithfulness and their willingness to follow where God led is really what established the foundation of the Hebrew belief system. And then you have Moses, who will eventually come in, and he helps solidify it as far as like a formalized faith or formalized religion. But it was really Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that solidified it as a faith of the people, and where we really see a lot of the character of who God is come out within their lifetimes. Abraham is also very important because it is through him that a covenant is made. Now, we have seen covenants before. There's the Adamic covenant, we have the Noahic covenant, and then here we'll have the Abrahamic covenant. With Abraham, it's important that we understand really like what a covenant is. So a covenant is a legal agreement between two individuals, one that has a lot of power and one who does not. The one who does not have a lot of power agrees that if they fail in their side of the agreement, that they will face some pretty major consequences for failing to uphold their end of the bargain. Normally, these would be like If we wanted to put it in a bit more modern views of it, it's almost like you take out a loan from a bank, or student loans. I talked about student loans here a couple weeks ago. It's like taking out a loan. Myself and the bank, I am the one with the lesser authority. I agree that I am going to make payments to the bank every month for a set amount of money, or more if I want to pay it off sooner. And then the bank fulfills their agreement in that they are going to go ahead and give me a loan. And then if I fail to meet the agreement, they can foreclose on a house, like with a mortgage. They can come and they can just repo your vehicle. They, depending on the type of loan it is, there are different consequences. And no matter what, my credit would take a ding. So that's a more modern example to help put in perspective what we're talking about. The thing that is very unique about the covenant that is made with Abraham, though, is that it is not a covenant where Abraham ends up facing the major consequences of it. Instead, Abraham and the agreement he makes that carries through all the generations is that when they fail to keep their part of the covenant, God is the one who faces the consequences for it. So even though God definitely disciplines the people, we'll see later on throughout history, we also very much see that God gives them a whole lot of grace, a whole lot of mercy. And at the end of the day, it is God who sends his son to be that perfect sacrifice that we see in the life and ministry and death of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And then he will raise again on the third day, fulfilling the prophets that we will later on be able to read and talk about, although we're not going to really hit on a bunch of them here during the course of this lesson. But Abraham being part of this covenant, we need to take a look at what the covenant is. So in the case here with Abraham, we see that one, God initiates, and God is the one who agrees to accept the consequences whenever Abraham and his family fails. You can do a deeper study on this if you want to take a look and learn about what's called covenant theology. It's very interesting, and it looks at the study of God through the lens of all the different covenants that he makes throughout Scripture. But I'm not going to go into a ton of details here. But we do need to think about okay, so what is it that we learn from Abraham, since he's a part of the lineage of Christ? And some of the things that we really do learn about the character of Abraham, and what we also see that we can apply to us, is that Abraham is very faithful. Like I said, when he screwed up bad. But throughout it all, Abraham never ran from God. Abraham never denies God. Abraham never feels like he is alone or denounces who God is. Instead, all throughout his life, through the highs and the lows, Abraham is faithful throughout the entire thing. I think that's something that we can really learn from, that no matter how bad life gets, we can still be faithful and understand that God is still faithful to us too. You look throughout the entire Old Testament, and it is just a repeated cycle of God being faithful to his people and faithful to what he says he's going to do, which is why there's eventually problems, because God was faithful in what he said. Two, there are consequences. Abraham, even though he was faithful and God was faithful and showed him a lot of grace and mercy, Abraham, when he messed up, he did mess up. And there are going to always be consequences for when we choose to go our own way. Sin, the fall, we talked about this with Adam, that, we have to daily deal with the consequences of Adam's choices. Likewise, hundreds and even a couple thousand years down the line, we're dealing and we're seeing the consequences of some of the decisions that Abraham made, that we have to accept and deal with the consequences of the choices and the sins that we choose to participate in. But we also see how faithful God is in his promises. as an overview of Abraham and Sarah, they're very, very old. They don't have any children. And children were a sign of blessing. It really is. And that's why, like, when you read later on in scripture, like when you meet people who are barren, it is they want children because it's a way to carry on the name. It carries on your heritage. It is a sign that God is blessing you. Sarah had not had any children, which leads to the whole Hagar and Ishmael debacle that eventually comes up. But God had said, I am going to give you children that are going to outnumber the stars, and through you all the world will be blessed. For Abraham to have children that outnumber the stars, that means him and his wife have to be able to have a baby. Sarah is well past the time. The woman has gone through menopause. Like, there is no way she should be able to get pregnant at this point. And God is faithful, and through an act that only God can do, he allows Sarah to conceive, and she gives birth to Isaac. Now, Isaac is their only child, and it is through him that the covenant is carried through. Abraham eventually remarries and has more children with his second wife. And of course, he's got Ishmael. That's a whole other issue. But you have Isaac now, who will be the one, I guess you could call him the keeper of the covenant. It's going to go through him, that he is the one with whom that promise is made. And as we see through all the generations later on in scripture, you end up with Jacob, who has 12 sons plus a daughter, and how they multiply and they go to Egypt and they're blessed and they grow to be a huge people group. And then whenever they leave, they're powerful enough to be able to overtake cities and nations. And they eventually establish, ancient Israel in and of itself, and then eventually you're going to get David, you're going to get Solomon, you're going to get all of these heroes of the faith that are going to come out of it. And it's going to coalesce in the person of Jesus Christ later on down the line. And it is through Jesus that we are all blessed. Every tongue, every tribe, every nation, the gospel is open to everyone. And we'll eventually see that with a few of the other people who are going to be a part of Christ's family tree. But God is faithful. And we see through the life of Abraham how faithful God is to carry out what it is that he says that he is going to do. And Abraham believed, and God provided. And I just think that it is so wonderful to be able to look back at scripture and see how faithful God is, even in the darkest times when I don't always feel like things are going to work out, or I don't always look at life and be like, oh, it's just so great. Sometimes life is just really, really hard. And I'm able to look back at scripture and all these different people throughout history and see that no, God is faithful. He fulfills his promises. But sometimes it's just not done in a way that I expect or the way I think it should happen. Thank you for joining me here as we talked about Abraham. I'm looking forward to seeing you all next time as we talk about another person in the family Christmas tree of Christ. So I will see you all next time. And as a reminder, you can also follow along on my blog, www.roadtrippinwithrachel.com. Bye.